It all started like any other ordinary day. I woke up, made coffee, and kissed my boyfriend Mark goodbye before heading to work. He was still in bed, half asleep, mumbling something about how he'd see me later. I didn't think much of it. We'd been together for 3 years, and things were normal, not perfect, but normal. Or so I thought. Work was hectic, as usual. I'm a nurse, and my shifts can be long and exhausting. That day, I was covering for a colleague, so I ended up staying late. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. I was tired. My feet were killing me, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed and sleep. But when I walked into our apartment, something felt off. The lights were dim, and the TV was on, but there was no sound. I called out for Mark, but there was no answer. I figured he might have fallen asleep on the couch, but when I walked into the living room, it was empty. That's when I heard it. A faint noise coming from our bedroom. It sounded like laughter. Soft, muffled, but unmistakable. My heart started racing. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe Mark was on the phone or watching a video. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I froze. There they were, Mark and my best friend, Sarah. In our bed, my bed, the sheets were tangled, and they were so caught up in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at them, trying to process what I was seeing. It was Sarah who noticed me first. Her eyes widened, and she quickly pulled the sheets up to cover herself. Mark turned around, and when he saw me, his face went pale. "Oh my God," he stammered. "This isn't what it looks like." I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something at them, but instead, I just stood there, numb. "Get out," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. "Both of you, get out of my house." Sarah scrambled out of bed, grabbing her clothes and trying to cover herself. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I never meant for this to happen." "Save it," I snapped. "Just get out." Mark tried to say something, but I cut him off. Don't even try to explain. I don't want to hear it." They both left, and as soon as the door closed behind them, I collapsed onto the floor. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable. I felt like my world had just been ripped apart. How could they do this to me? How could the two people I trusted most betray me like this? I spent the rest of the night crying, replaying everything in my head. The signs had been there, I realized. The late-night texts, the secretive phone calls, the way Mark had been distant lately. I'd brushed it off, thinking it was just stress from work. But now it all made sense. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone, not after what had happened. I spent the day cleaning the apartment, trying to erase any trace of Mark and Sarah. But no matter how much I scrubbed, I couldn't get rid of the image of them together in my mind. A few days later, Sarah showed up at my door. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and her eyes were red from crying. "Please," she said, "let me explain." I didn't want to hear it, but part of me needed to know why. So I let her in, and we sat down on the couch. She told me everything, how it had started innocently, with her coming over to keep Mark company while I was at work, how one thing had led to another, and before they knew it, they'd crossed a line they couldn't come back from. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're my best friend." I don't know what I was thinking. I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, but the betrayal was too fresh, too painful. You should go, I said quietly. I need time to think. She left, and I was alone again. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to try to move past this. But another part of me knew that things would never be the same. How could I ever trust them again? The days turned into weeks, and I found myself stuck in a loop of anger, sadness, and confusion. Mark tried to reach out multiple times. Texts, calls, even showing up at my work once. But I couldn't bring myself to face him. Every time I thought about him, all I could see was him with Sarah, in our bed, betraying me in the worst way possible. It was like a movie playing on repeat in my head, and I couldn't press pause. Sarah, on the other hand, gave me space. She didn't call or text, and I wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. Part of me wanted her to fight for our friendship, to show me that she cared enough to try to fix what she'd broken. But another part of me was relieved she stayed away. I didn't know what I would say to her if she showed up again. Work became my escape. I threw myself into my shifts, volunteering for extra hours, just so I wouldn't have to be alone with my thoughts. My co-workers noticed the change in me. I was quieter, more withdrawn, but no one asked too many questions. I was grateful for that. I didn't want to talk about what had happened. I didn't want to admit that my life had fallen apart. One night, after a particularly long shift, I came home to find Mark waiting outside my apartment. He was leaning against the wall, looking tired and disheveled. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, but he saw me before I could. "Please," he said, his voice pleading. "Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I hesitated, but something in his eyes made me stop. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was the fact that he looked as broken as I felt. I nodded and let him inside. We sat down on the couch, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Mark broke it. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I need you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. What happened with Sarah, it was a mistake, a huge, stupid mistake. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the words felt hollow. A mistake? I repeated, my voice shaking. You slept with my best friend Mark. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. He flinched, but he didn't argue. You're right, he said. It was a choice. A terrible, selfish choice. And I regret it every single day. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to try to move past this and rebuild what we had. But another part of me was terrified. What if he did it again? What if I gave him another chance? Only for him to break my heart all over again. I don't know if I can trust you, I said finally. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. Mark nodded, his eyes filled with pain. I understand, he said, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back, if you'll let me. I didn't give him an answer that night. I told him I needed time to think, and he respected that. He left, and I was alone again, more confused than ever. Over the next few weeks, Mark tried to prove that he was serious about fixing things. He started going to therapy, and he even reached out to Sarah to end whatever was left of their whatever it was. He sent me flowers, wrote me letters, and did everything he could to show me that he was committed to making things right. But no matter how hard he tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was broken between us. The trust was gone, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Then, one day, Sarah showed up at my door again. This time, she looked different, more determined, less apologetic. We need to talk, she said, her voice firm. I didn't want to let her in, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped aside, and she walked into the apartment. "I know I messed up," she said, getting straight to the point. "And I know I can't take back what I did. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. You're my best friend, and I love you. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that she'd ruined everything. But another part of me missed her. She'd been my best friend for years, and it hurt to lose her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "But I miss you, and I want to try to move past this, for both of us." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "That's all I'm asking for," she said. "A chance to make things right." We talked for hours that night, about everything, our friendship, what had happened, and where we went from here. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wanted to walk away. But by the end of the night, I felt like we'd taken the first step toward healing. As for Mark, I still didn't know what to do about him. Part of me wanted to give him another chance, but another part of me was scared. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of losing myself in the process. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to make a decision, one way or another. And whatever I chose, I knew it would change everything. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly started to find a new rhythm. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. But I was trying to heal, trying to move forward, trying to figure out what I wanted. Mark and I started seeing a couples therapist. It was his idea, and at first I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if therapy could fix what had been broken between us. But I agreed to give it a shot, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. The sessions were hard. There were moments when I felt like we were making progress, and other moments when it felt like we were just going in circles. We talked about everything: the betrayal, the trust issues, the doubts. And through it all, Mark kept saying the same thing: "I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the pain. Every time I looked at him, I saw Sarah. Every time he touched me, I wondered if he was thinking about her. It was exhausting, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. Meanwhile, Sarah and I were slowly rebuilding our friendship. It wasn't the same as before. It couldn't be. But we were trying. We started meeting for coffee once a week, just to talk. At first, the conversations were awkward, filled with long silences and unspoken apologies. But over time, we started to find our way back to each other. One day during one of our coffee dates, Sarah brought up Mark. "How are things with him?" she asked, her voice careful. I hesitated, not sure how much to share. "It's complicated," I said finally. "We're in therapy, and he's trying. But I don't know if I can ever fully trust him again." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get that," she said. "What he did, it was awful, and I know I played a part in it. But I also know that he loves you, and if anyone can make this work, it's you two." Her words surprised me. After everything that had happened, I didn't expect her to be supportive of my relationship with Mark. But in a way, it made sense. She knew him, maybe better than anyone else. And if she believed he was sincere, maybe there was hope. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I loved Mark, but I wasn't sure if that was enough. Love wasn't supposed to hurt this much, was it? One night, after a particularly tough therapy session, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. It was late, and the streets were quiet. As I walked, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the slow, painful process of trying to rebuild what had been broken. And then, out of nowhere, it hit me. I didn't have to keep doing this. I didn't have to keep trying to fix something that might be beyond repair. I had spent so much time focusing on what Mark wanted, on what Sarah wanted, that I had forgotten to think about what I wanted. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my own life, and I knew what I had to do. When I got home, Mark was waiting for me. He looked worried, like he could tell something was on my mind. "Are you okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk," I said. He nodded, his expression serious. "Okay." We sat down on the couch, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I started to explain. I told him how I'd been feeling, the doubts, the fears, the realization that I needed to put myself first. I told him that I loved him, but that love wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. Mark listened quietly, his eyes filled with pain. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if this is what you need, then I'll respect that. But I want you to know that I'll always love you. And if you ever change your mind, I'll be here." His words broke my heart, but I knew I was making the right decision. We talked for hours that night about everything, our relationship, our future, and what it meant to let go. By the time the sun came up, we both knew it was over. The next few weeks were hard. There were moments when I questioned my decision, when I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But deep down, I knew I'd done the right thing. I needed to focus on myself, on healing, on figuring out who I was without Mark. For Sarah, our friendship continued to grow. It wasn't the same as before, but it was stronger in some ways. We had been through hell together, and somehow we'd come out the other side. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. After Mark and I officially ended things, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Relief because the constant tension and uncertainty were finally over, and emptiness because, well, he had been a huge part of my life for 3 years. Even though I knew it was the right decision, it didn't make the process any less painful. I threw myself into work even more, picking up extra shifts and volunteering for overtime. My co-workers started to notice, and one of them, a fellow nurse named Emily, pulled me aside one day. "You've been working non-stop," she said, her tone gentle but concerned. "Are you okay?" I wasn't used to people asking me that. I'd been so focused on just getting through each day that I hadn't stopped to think about how I was really doing. "I'm fine," I said automatically, but Emily didn't look convinced. "You know, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she said. "We all are. You don't have to go through this alone." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I realized I'd been isolating myself, not just from Mark and Sarah, but from everyone. I'd been so caught up in my own pain that I hadn't let anyone in. Maybe it was time to change that. Around the same time, Sarah and I started spending more time together. Our friendship was still fragile, but it was getting stronger. One evening, we decided to go out for dinner, something we hadn't done in months. It felt like old times, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. But then, halfway through the meal, Sarah brought up Mark. "Have you talked to him at all?" she asked, her voice careful. I shook my head. "Not really. He texted me a couple of times, but I didn't respond. I think it's better if we just stay out of each other's lives for now." Sarah nodded, but I could tell she had more to say. "I ran into him last week," she admitted. "He looked rough, like he hasn't been sleeping." I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, but another part of me was still too angry to care. He made his choices. I said finally. He has to live with them. Sarah didn't push the subject, and we moved on to lighter topics, but her words stayed with me. I couldn't help but wonder how Mark was really doing. Despite everything, I didn't want him to be miserable. I just didn't know if I was ready to be part of his life again. Even as a friend, a few weeks later, I got a call from Mark's mom. She and I had always been close, and even after the breakup, she'd reached out a few times to check on me. This time, though, her voice sounded different, more urgent. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I'm really worried about Mark. He's not doing well. He's been drinking a lot, and he's not taking care of himself. I know you two aren't together anymore, but I thought maybe you could talk to him. He listens to you." I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I didn't want to get involved. Mark wasn't my responsibility anymore. But on the other hand, I couldn't just ignore what his mum was saying. Despite everything, I still cared about him. After a long pause, I agreed to call him. When he picked up, his voice was slurred, and I could tell he'd been drinking. "Hey," he said, sounding surprised. "I didn't think you'd ever call me again." "I wasn't planning to," I admitted. "But your mom called me. She's worried about you." Mark sighed. "Yeah, I figured she would. She's been on my case for weeks." We talked for a while, and I could hear the pain in his voice. He told me how much he regretted everything, how he wished he could go back and change what he'd done. "I don't know how to move on," he said. "I don't know how to live without you." His words broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't let myself get pulled back into his mess. "You have to figure that out for yourself," I said gently. "I can't fix this for you, Mark. You have to want to get better." He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." "I know," I said, "and I forgive you. But that doesn't mean we can go back to how things were." After that conversation, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't hate Mark anymore. I didn't love him either, not in the way I used to, but I was finally able to let go of the anger and the pain. As for Sarah, our friendship continued to grow. We started hanging out more, and it felt like we were finally moving past what had happened. One night, over a bottle of wine, she admitted something that surprised me. "I think I'm going to move," she said. "Not far, just to the next city over. I need a fresh start, you know?" I did know, and as much as I would miss her, I understood why she needed to do it. "I'll miss you," I said, "but I think it's a good idea. You deserve to be happy." She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "You do too," she said. "And I'm so sorry for everything I put you through." "We've been through a lot," I said, "but we're still here, and that counts for something." Life wasn't perfect, but it was getting better. I was learning to be okay on my own, to focus on myself and what I needed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally moving forward. It's been almost a year since everything happened, a year since my world fell apart, and a year since I started putting it back together. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Mark and I haven't spoken since that phone call. I heard through mutual friends that he's doing better. He started therapy, cut back on drinking, and is trying to rebuild his life. I'm glad. I don't hate him anymore, and I genuinely hope he finds happiness. But I also know that our chapter is closed, and that's okay. Sarah moved to the next city over, just like she said she would. We still talk regularly, and our friendship feels stronger than ever. It's not the same as it was before, but maybe that's a good thing. We've both grown, and our friendship has grown with us. As for me, I've been focusing on myself. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had the time for. It's become a way for me to express myself, to process everything I've been through. I've also been spending more time with friends and family, reconnecting with people I'd drifted away from during my relationship with Mark. And then there's Emily, the co-worker who reached out to me when I was at my lowest. We've become close friends, and she's been a huge source of support. She's the one who encouraged me to start sharing my story, to turn my pain into something meaningful, which brings me to why I'm here, talking to all of you. I wanted to share my story because I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. Betrayal, heartbreak, loss. These are things so many of us experience, but we don't always talk about them. We bury the pain, try to move on, and pretend everything's okay, but it's not. And that's okay too. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that healing isn't linear. Some days are better than others. Some days, I feel strong and confident, like I can take on the world. Other days, the pain comes, rushing back, and I feel like I'm back at square one. But that's part of the process. It's messy, and it's hard, but it's worth it. I don't know what the future holds. And that used to scare me, but now I see it as an opportunity. I've been through one of the hardest things I'll ever face, and I came out the other side. If I can survive that, I can survive anything. So, to anyone out there who's going through something similar, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's okay to feel hurt, to feel angry, to feel lost, but don't let those feelings define you. You are so much more than what happened to you, and you deserve to be happy, to find peace, and to build a life that brings you joy. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, but I hope it helped someone out there feel a little less alone. If you've been through something like this, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How did you cope? What helped you heal? Let's support each other and share our experiences. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other videos.